I've never been fond of cemeteries, which is ironic since I now find myself here each Saturday. Back when I was a building inspector in town, I went out of my way to steer clear of this place. Now, I sit on a bench facing Eleanor's grave, speaking to her as if she was still with me. "Eleanor, I brought your favorite chrysanthemums today," I murmur, fiddling with my spectacles. "You used to joke that those flowers were for the living, not the departed, but I have a feeling you'd appreciate them anyway. It has been 15 months since I laid my wife to rest, 15 long months of one-sided conversations with a headstone. I know she isn't listening, yet I continue to come. Perhaps it's a way for me to hear my own thoughts. At home, there's no one to listen. Not my son, not the grandchildren, and certainly not my daughter-in-law. Especially her. Every time I leave the cemetery, I swear to myself that I will finally stop visiting my son's family. But like clockwork, Julian calls on Sunday, and his voice carries the warmth and care I so desperately want to believe is there. I fool myself, but I always go. And I always spend the evening weathering Serafina's subtle insults and the cold indifference of my grandchildren. This past Saturday, I found myself on the bench again, my gaze fixed on the grey granite that has become my confidant. I am 73 years old, and I spent 47 of those years with Eleanor. Now, all that remains is a cold stone slab etched with dates, and a profound emptiness where she used to be. Serafina brought up the retirement community again today. I tell the portrait on the stone. She claims they have specialists who know how to manage people of my generation as if I'm a broken-down appliance in need of special handling. The wind rustles the leaves above, and I like to imagine it's Eleanor sighing, shaking her head. She never cared for Serafina. The first time Julian brought her over, Eleanor whispered to me, "That girl has cold eyes, Arthur," but what was I to do? Julian looked at her like she was the center of his world. "You were right about her," I say, adjusting the flowers in the vase. "You always are. Walking is a daily ritual for me. Dr. Mills insists that at my age, I need to keep moving. It feels peculiar. I once walked to extend my life, but now I walk merely to fill the passing hours. My house sits in the old section of town, a collection of equally aged and weathered homes. It's a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a porch that groans underfoot. Eleanor always planned to have it repainted, but we never got around to it. There's no point in it now. Inside, everything is just as she left it. I haven't shifted a single piece of furniture or discarded one knick-knack. I sometimes delude myself into thinking that if I preserve her space, a part of her will remain here, within these walls, within these objects. Julian and Serafina reside in a new development, in a sleek, modern house with vast windows and minimalist decor. Whenever I visit, I feel like an old, worn-out armchair in a showroom of designer furniture. I made myself coffee, as I do each night, and settled by the window. I would be seeing them tomorrow, readying myself for another round of Serafina's pointed remarks and the children's disinterest. In the first few months after Eleanor's death, Julian had been so attentive, visiting every day to check on me. Even Serafina was on her best behavior. But soon, life returned to its new normal. Julian became consumed by his work. Serafina remembered her dislike for me, and the grandchildren, Leo and Clara, seemed to have forgotten my existence altogether. The ringing of the phone sliced through my thoughts. "Dad, just a reminder about lunch tomorrow?" Julian's voice was rushed, as always, squeezed between 2 more important tasks. "Of course, son, I remember. I'm not so old that I forget things like that," I tried to say lightly, but I could hear the bitterness creeping in. "Great. Serafina is making a roast. See you then, Dad." He disconnected before I could respond, a habit that defined our recent, hollow conversations. This morning, I spent an absurd amount of time choosing my attire. It felt foolish to fuss at my age, but I knew Serafina would find something to comment on if I looked the least bit unkempt. The last time, she'd spotted a small stain on my sweater and spent the entire dinner ostentatiously dabbing at it with a napkin, clucking, "Arthur, you really must take better care of yourself." I selected the grey suit Eleanor and I had bought for the theatre and a blue tie. In the mirror, a thin, wrinkled man with grey hair stared back at me with a hint of sorrow. You look fine, I told my reflection, feeling silly immediately after. Julian and Serafina's house was a 20-minute drive away. I could have taken a taxi, but I opted for the bus, another habit that irked Serafina, who believed public transport was beneath a gentleman. As I neared their home, I noted that Serafina's car was missing from the driveway. That was unusual. Sundays were typically family days. I rang the bell, and Julian answered, looking slightly flustered. "Dad, you're here," he seemed confused. "I arrived at the usual time," I answered, stepping inside. "Yes, of course. Come in. Serafina should be back any moment." She went to help her friend Diane with something. I nodded, though I knew Diane was out of town. I had seen her at the market last week, and she'd told me about her vacation, but I held my tongue. In the living room, my grandchildren, Leo and Clara, were glued to their phones, not even glancing up as I entered. "Hello, my dears," I said with forced cheer. Leo mumbled a response without looking up, and Clara offered a quick hello before her attention returned to her screen. I can still picture them as small children, running to greet me, begging for stories about my work as a construction inspector, clambering onto my lap to look at old photo albums. Now, at 10 and 12, I am just an old man they are forced to tolerate during Sunday lunch. "Dad, would you like some tea while we wait for Serafina?" Julian asked, glancing nervously at his watch. "Yes, that would be lovely." We moved to the kitchen, where Julian busied himself with the kettle. I could tell he was anxious about his wife's absence, another one of her delays he clearly didn't want to discuss. "How are things at the firm?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Fine," he shrugged. "The usual. Too many projects, not enough time." Julian was an architect, an ambitious man, and I was proud of him. But lately, our conversations about his work were brief and superficial before he'd changed the subject. "How's your back?" he asked. "Still acting up?" "Sometimes, but I manage. Maybe you should see a good specialist." Serafina was saying that Sunset Hills Retirement Community has excellent doctors. There it was again. The nursing home, woven casually into conversation. "I don't need their doctors, Julian. Dr. Mills is doing a fine job." Julian was about to reply when we heard the front door open. Serafina had arrived. She breezed into the kitchen carrying shopping bags, her blonde hair pulled back, a bright smile on her face, the same smile she wore when she was trying to conceal something. "Arthur," she exclaimed, feigning surprise. "You're here." "I'm so sorry, I was held up at the market. I decided to get some fresh greens for a salad." I nodded, even though I could see no vegetables in her bags. "It's all right, Serafina. Julian and I were just chatting about his work." "Oh, how wonderful." She placed the bags on the counter and kissed her husband on the cheek. "Darling, have you told your father about your new project?" Julian looked embarrassed. "No, not yet." "Arthur, you have no idea how brilliant your son is," Serafina gushed with theatrical enthusiasm. "His design was chosen for a new commercial center in the suburbs. It's a huge honor. Congratulations, son." I was genuinely pleased for him. "Why didn't you mention it?" "I wanted to wait for the official confirmation," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "But that came through last week," Serafina remarked reproachfully. "Arthur, no offense, but Julian has so much on his mind, he forgets even important things." I knew she was lying. Julian simply hadn't wanted to share his success with me. He was shutting me out, treating me like a stranger. "I understand," I said, striving for calm. "We all have our own concerns." Serafina began unloading her bags, pointedly ignoring me. She then called out to the children in the living room. "Leo! Clara! Come help set the table. Your grandfather is here." They trudged reluctantly into the kitchen. "Hi, Grandpa," Clara said without looking at me. "Hello, my dear." I moved to hug her, but she sidestepped me and started arranging plates. Leo just nodded and grabbed the silverware. I remember how they used to beam when I visited, begging for stories about the buildings I inspected. Now, my presence was barely an inconvenience. Arthur, would you mind not standing in the way? Serafina asked with an odd smile. We're trying to set the table. I moved aside, feeling utterly redundant in this house as Julian focused on the roast, avoiding my gaze. When we finally sat down, Serafina launched into a monologue about her week, a trip to the spa, meeting friends, taking Clara to dance class. She spoke without pause, dominating the conversation. And how was your week, Arthur? She finally asked when she ran out of stories, her tone condescending, as if questioning a small child. Quiet, I replied. Reading, walks in the park, seeing friends, she raised an eyebrow. You still have friends? Sarah, Julian warned. What? I was just asking. At his age, so many people are, you know. I gripped my fork a little too tightly. Yes, Serafina. I still have friends. Not everyone passes away at 70, of course not, she waved a hand dismissively. I'm just concerned about you. Living all alone in that big house. It could be dangerous. Every conversation, she somehow steered it back to me needing to move. My house isn't that large, I said. And I manage perfectly well, but what if you fall? Or forget to turn off the stove? She looked at me with feigned worry. In a retirement community, they would look after you. Mom's right, Grandpa, Clara suddenly chimed in. Mrs. Gable from my school said her grandfather moved into one and he's really happy now. I looked at my granddaughter, surprised by her sudden input, but I could see she was merely echoing her mother. Thank you for your concern, my dear, I said, hiding my disappointment. But I prefer to stay in my own home. You're so stubborn, Arthur, Serafina sighed. Just like your wife, it was a deliberate, low blow. She knew how much I missed Eleanor and she used it. Yes, I am, I said quietly. And I'm proud of it. The rest of the meal passed in a heavy silence. The kids returned to their phones, Julian studied his plate, and Serafina shot irritated looks in my direction. When it was time for dessert, she suddenly remembered she'd forgotten to buy ice cream. I'm so sorry, Arthur, she said, devoid of any regret. I know how much you enjoy it. It's fine, I said. I'm full. I could run to the store, Julian offered, desperate to escape the tense atmosphere. No, it's fine, Serafina said quickly. I have cookies. Arthur, you like cookies, don't you? Without waiting for an answer, she returned with a package of cookies I detested, a fact she knew well. Here, help yourself, she said, placing the plate before me. Thank you, but I think I'll pass, I replied. Suit yourself, she shrugged, turning to the children. Leo, Clara, who wants a cookie? They each took one in silence, their eyes still on their phones. I knew it was time for me to go. This Sunday lunch, like all the others, had become an exercise in endurance. I should be going, I said, rising from the table. Already? Julian looked at me with a hint of relief. It's early. I have things to do, I lied. Thank you for lunch. I'll see you out. He stood and followed me to the door. Julian gave me an awkward hug on the porch. I'm sorry about Serafina, he murmured. She's just worried about you. I knew that was false. She wasn't worried about me at all, but I nodded, unwilling to argue with my son. Of course. I understand. I'll see you next week, he asked, opening the door. Yes, of course. I knew I would be back, no matter what. He is my son, and I love him. Driving home, I reflected on how my life had been upended since Eleanor's passing, how I had become a stranger in my own son's family, and how Serafina had systematically made me into a burden she was eager to discard. I had noticed her frequent absences during my recent visits. Today, she was late. The time before, she'd left mid-meal for an urgent call from a friend. Each time, she returned with a faint flush on her cheeks and a glint in her eyes that a simple errand couldn't explain. Something was happening in my daughter-in-law's life, something she was carefully concealing. And I started to suspect that this secret had the power to destroy my son's family. When I got home, I sat in my armchair and stared at Eleanor's photograph for a long time. Her smiling face looked back at me, and I could almost hear her voice. Arthur, you have to find out what's going on. For Julian's sake, I resolved then and there to discover where Serafina was disappearing to, and why she was so desperate to get rid of me. Tuesday was the day of the revelation. I usually spend Tuesdays at the city park, sitting on a bench by the pond to feed the ducks. It's a small habit, one that began when Eleanor was still with me. We often went there together, and now I continue the ritual alone, a tangible link to my past. The morning was overcast but dry. I put on my old raincoat, grabbed a bag of bread, and walked to the park, just 10 minutes from my house, one of the perks of living in the old part of town. The park was rarely crowded at this time of year, mostly retirees like myself and a few young mothers with strollers. I settled onto my usual bench, tossing bread to the ducks, my thoughts drifting back to the Sunday lunch, to Serafina's lateness and her peculiar behavior. I didn't want to entertain the idea that she could be unfaithful to Julian, but the suspicion was taking root. My thoughts were shattered by a peal of laughter from across the pond, a woman's laugh, both familiar and jarringly out of place. I looked up and saw Serafina. She was strolling down a path with a tall, dark-haired man I didn't recognize, who was dressed in an expensive-looking suit. He was leaning in, whispering something in her ear, and she was laughing with a freedom I had never witnessed in my son's presence. I instinctively ducked my head, pulling my cap down to avoid being seen. They walked past, oblivious to me, and headed toward a small gazebo on the far side of the park, shielded by lilac bushes. My heart pounded. It could be a business meeting. Julian had mentioned she'd recently started working for a real estate agency. Perhaps this man was a client. I tried to convince myself, but my gut told me otherwise. I wrestled with myself for a few moments. A part of me wanted to leave, to unsee what I had seen, to stay out of it. But another part, the part that would always be a father to my son, demanded the truth. Concern and curiosity won. Cautiously, I circled the pond along a different path and approached the gazebo from behind the bushes. Through the gaps in the leaves, I could watch them unnoticed. What I saw erased all doubt. Serafina and the stranger were standing intimately close. His arm was around her waist, and she was looking up at him with a tenderness I had never seen her show my son. Then, he leaned down and kissed her, not a brief peck, but a long, passionate kiss. And she returned it with equal fervor. The ground seemed to drop out from under me. Serafina was cheating on Julian. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchildren, was betraying my son. I couldn't watch any more. I backed away quietly and walked swiftly toward the park exit, my mind reeling. I needed to process what I had just witnessed and decide what to do. All day, I was restless, pacing my house, weighing my options. Should I tell Julian? Would he even believe me? Lately, my son sided with his wife in every disagreement. I had no proof beyond the word of an old man against that of a young woman. I knew how that would play out. Confronting Serafina seemed equally unwise. She would deny everything, then use it to turn Julian and the children against me completely, painting me as a senile old man inventing stories. By evening, I knew I needed help, someone who could gather concrete evidence of her betrayal. And I thought of Gideon Croft. Gideon was a friend of my late brother, Walter. They had served together on the police force before Gideon retired and opened a private investigation agency. We weren't close, but we stayed in touch, meeting for coffee occasionally to reminisce. The next morning, I called him. Gideon Croft speaking, his voice was just as I remembered, low and gravelly. Gideon, it's Arthur Vance, Walter's brother Arthur. It's been too long. How are you, old friend? Not too bad, I stammered, unsure how to begin. Listen, Gideon, I need your help. Professionally, there was a pause. Professionally, he repeated. You want to hire me? Yes, I took a deep breath. It's about my daughter-in-law. I think she's cheating on my son. Another, longer pause. I see, Gideon said, his tone turning serious. Let's meet. Better not to discuss this over the phone. We arranged to meet in an hour at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place we were unlikely to be seen. The coffee house was exactly what I'd pictured for such a meeting, quiet, with dim lighting and private booths. Gideon was already there, at a table in the back corner. The years had been kind to him. He had the same sharp blue eyes, close-cropped grey hair, and a sturdy build that had endured. "Arthur," he stood and gave my hand a firm shake. "Have a seat. I ordered you a coffee, black, no sugar." If I recall you remember correctly, I sat down opposite him. "Thank you for meeting me always, for Walter's family," he said, taking a sip from his cup. "Now, tell me what's going on." And I told him everything. About the change in my relationship with Julian and Serafina after Eleanor's death, about Serafina's strange behavior, and finally, about what I had seen in the park. Gideon listened intently, not interrupting, just nodding and sipping his coffee. When I finished, he drummed his fingers on the table. "An unpleasant situation," he said finally. "But unfortunately, a common one. I've seen it dozens of times, so you'll take the case?" I asked. "Of course," he nodded. "But first, what's your endgame? What do you want to achieve?" I paused. What did I want? To protect my son from this betrayal? To win back his affection? To punish Serafina? "I want to know the truth," I said at last. "The whole truth. Then I'll decide what to do." Gideon nodded, as if expecting that answer. "Good. I can put your daughter-in-law under surveillance. Find out who this man is, how often they meet, how serious it is. I'll get you evidence, photos, videos, maybe even audio if I can manage it. Is that legal?" I asked. "For the most part, yes," he shrugged. "I'll only monitor her in public spaces. No breaking and entering." "All by the book," I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. "How much will this cost?" Gideon named a figure that made me flinch. It was a substantial sum for a retiree, but I had savings set aside for Julian and the children. I decided this was a better use for it now. "I agree," I said. "When can you start?" "Today," he replied, pulling out a notebook. "I'll need some information. Your son and daughter-in-law's address, their routines, and a photo of Serafina." I gave him everything I knew. I told him Serafina worked at a real estate agency called Premium Homes, that she usually dropped the kids at school around 8, that she visited a spa on Fridays. I showed him a photo from last Christmas, Serafina standing by the tree, flashing her counterfeit smile. "Excellent," Gideon said, writing it all down. "This is enough to begin. I'll be in touch as soon as I have something. Don't call me. If she's hiding something, she might be paranoid." I nodded, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and fear. "And Arthur," he looked me directly in the eye, "be prepared. The truth might be worse than you imagine, and your son may not thank you for it." I knew he was right. I was meddling, and it could backfire spectacularly. But I also knew I couldn't stand by and watch my son's life be dismantled. "I understand the risks," I said. "But I have to do this." Gideon nodded and extended his hand. "Then let's get to work." The following days were a blur of anxious waiting. I went about my normal routine, shopping, gardening, reading, but my thoughts were constantly with Gideon, imagining him tailing Serafina, uncovering the truth. On Friday, just 3 days after our meeting, the phone rang. "Arthur, it's Gideon. I have something for you." My heart leaped. "What is it?" "Not on the phone. Meet me at my office at 6 this evening." "You know the address?" I did. It was a small building on Maple Street. "I'll be there," I said, my hands trembling as I hung up. Gideon's office was Spartan and functional, a desk, a couple of chairs, and filing cabinets. His licenses and diplomas hung on the wall. "Come in, Arthur," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Have a seat." I sat, trying to still my shaking hands. Gideon pulled a folder from his desk and placed it in front of me. "Here's what I found over the past 3 days," he began. "Your daughter-in-law is indeed seeing another man. His name is Damien Thorne. He's a manager at the same real estate firm she works for. 42, divorced, no children." He opened the folder and showed me a picture of the same man I had seen in the park. They meet almost every day, Gideon continued. Lunchtime, after work. Sometimes in the park, sometimes at a cafe, but most often at the Pine Tree Motel just outside of town. He showed me a series of photos, Serafina and Damien entering the motel, Serafina emerging 2 hours later, fixing her hair, Damien kissing her goodbye beside her car. It's clear their relationship has been going on for some time, Gideon said. The staff at the motel recognize them. They always take the same room, and my stomach clenched with pain and fury. It was one thing to suspect, another to see irrefutable proof. There's more. Gideon pulled a small digital recorder from the folder. I managed to record their conversation at the cafe yesterday. I think you should hear this. He pressed a button, and their voices filled the small office. First, I heard Serafina's light, carefree laugh, the one I'd heard in the park. Then a man's confident voice. When are you going to tell him? Damien asked. Soon, Damien. I promise, Serafina replied. It's just not the right time. I have to deal with the old man first. His father. You've been saying that for 6 months, the man sounded irritated. I'm working on it, Serafina's voice was placating. I've nearly convinced Julian to put him in a retirement community. Once the old man is gone, we can sell his house and get the money for a down payment on our own place, and if he doesn't agree, he will, she said confidently. He doesn't have a choice. He's old, getting feeble. Julian knows he can't look after him. And I'm certainly not going to play nurse to that old bore. They both laughed. Gideon turned off the recorder. There's more, he said, but I think you get the picture. I sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just an affair. They were plotting to get rid of me, to sell my house, and use the money to fund their new life. And Julian? Was my son really considering sending me to a nursing home? What are you going to do? Gideon asked, watching me closely. I didn't know. One part of me wanted to race to my son, show him the pictures, play him the tape. But another part feared his reaction. What if he sided with his wife? I need to think. I finally managed. This is a lot to process. Gideon nodded with understanding. Take the folder. And the recorder. There are a few more recordings on there. Listen to them at home, with a clear head. Then decide. I took the evidence, feeling its weight not in my hands, but in my soul. Thank you, Gideon, I said. You did good work. Just my job, he shrugged, but I saw the sympathy in his eyes. Call me when you decide on your next move. I might be able to help. I nodded and left his office, clutching the folder so tightly my knuckles were white. Back at home, I spread the photos across my dining table and stared at them, as if searching for a flaw, some evidence of a mistake. But the more I looked, the clearer the ugly truth became. Serafina was betraying my son and plotting to dispose of me. I played the rest of the recordings. In one, she and Damien discussed their future life together. In another, she complained about Julian, calling him dull and spineless. In a third, they discussed the children, how Clara would probably stay with Julian, which was for the best because Damien wasn't fond of kids. Each word was a fresh stab of a knife. I thought of my son, my grandchildren, and how their lives would be shattered when this all came out. And it would come out. Serafina would eventually leave for her lover, abandoning my family. I had to do something. But what? Confront Serafina? That would only escalate the war. Tell Julian directly? He might not believe me, thinking I was trying to drive a wedge between them out of spite. I sat at the table late into the night, unable to find a solution. I caught myself wishing Eleanor were here. She would have known what to do. But she was gone, and this decision was mine alone. As dawn approached, an idea began to take shape in my mind. A plan to expose the truth in a way Serafina couldn't possibly escape. A plan that would force Julian to see his wife for who she truly was. I picked up the phone and called Gideon again. After speaking with Gideon, I felt a strange sense of calm. The decision was made. All I had to do now was play my part. While Gideon gathered more details, I resolved to act as if nothing had changed. That Sunday, I went to Julian and Serafina's for lunch. Though every look at my daughter-in-law filled me with a mixture of rage and revulsion, I concealed my feelings, smiling and making small talk. Serafina was exceptionally sweet, offering me second helpings and even presenting me with a new sweater. A few weeks ago, I might have been touched. Now, I saw it as an attempt to lull me into a false sense of security. "Arthur, you seem a bit pale," she said over dessert. "I'm fine, Serafina," I replied evenly. "I'm in excellent health for my age, of course," she smiled her calculated smile. "It's just that at your age, you have to be so careful." My aunt moved into a retirement community and it transformed her life. The care, the social activities. "Mom's right, Grandpa," Leo chimed in from behind his phone. "They told us about them at school. They sound pretty cool." I wanted to ask my grandson if he truly wanted me living among strangers, but I refrained. "Thank you for the concern," I said instead. "But I prefer to stay in my house. My memories are their memories." Serafina wrinkled her nose. "Arthur, the past is the past. You have to live in the present." "I am living in the present," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "A present where I choose to remain in my own home." She was the first to look away. A small victory. 3 days later, I met Gideon at our usual cafe. "The results are in, and they're conclusive," he said, opening a folder. He showed me more photos of Serafina with Damien Thorne. Holding hands leaving the office, dining intimately at a restaurant called the Golden Lily, and checking into the same motel. "I also have another recording," Gideon said, handing me a small audio player. I put on the headphones and listened. "I can't take this double life anymore, Damien," Serafina's voice said. "I want to be with you." "Me too, sweetheart," the man replied. "But we have to be careful. Julian won't find out," she said confidently. "He's too trusting and wrapped up in his work and the old man." "Arthur." She laughed, a harsh sound. "He's too lost in grief to notice a thing. Besides, I'm making progress. Once he agrees to the nursing home, we sell his house, get our down payment, and I file for divorce. The children will stay with Julian. They're old enough. Besides, you don't really like kids, do you?" "Right," Damien agreed. I felt a cold dread spread through me. She wasn't just cheating on my son, she was prepared to abandon her own children. "What will you do with this?" Gideon asked gently. My first instinct was to run to Julian. But what if Serafina convinced him it was all a fabrication? "I don't know," I admitted. "I need to think." He handed me the folder and the audio player. "All the evidence is here. Study it. Then decide." That evening, my pondering was interrupted by a phone call from Julian. "Dad," he sounded tense. "Can Serafina and I come over tonight? We need to talk." My heart raced. Had they discovered my investigation? "Of course, son," I said, trying to sound normal. "I'll expect you for dinner." I quickly hid the evidence and prepared a simple meal. They arrived at 7, Julian looking serious, Serafina animated and smiling a bit too widely. After a tense dinner, Julian finally spoke. "Dad, we need to discuss something important. Serafina and I. We've decided it would be best for you to move into the Sunset Hills community." It was happening, just as she'd planned on the tape. "A nursing home." I feigned surprise. "But why?" "For your safety, Dad," Julian said, his eyes filled with what I knew was genuine, if misguided, concern. "We've already been to Sunset Hills," Serafina added eagerly. "They're ready for you anytime and it's expensive, I imagine?" I asked, looking her in the eye. "Money isn't an issue," she said smoothly. "We'll sell your house to cover the costs to my house." "My house is not for sale," I said firmly. "And I am not moving, Dad," Julian pleaded. "Just think about the future when I can no longer live alone." "We'll talk then," I replied. "Until then, I'm staying put." Dinner ended awkwardly. I knew this was just the first move in Serafina's game. She would keep pressuring Julian until he broke. I couldn't let her destroy my son's life and my grandchildren's future. I couldn't let her win. Pulling out the folder of evidence, a new plan began to form in my mind, one that would expose the truth so completely that she would have no escape. I called Gideon. Gideon, I need your help again. I have a plan to expose Serafina, but I'll need your assistance. I laid out my idea. Gideon listened to my plan, a risky but potentially effective strategy. The key was the right time and place. I wanted to give her the rope to hang herself, to let her believe she had won, and then, at her moment of triumph, reveal everything. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Julian called to invite me to dinner on Saturday. To come to a decision, he suggested the Golden Lily, the same restaurant where Serafina and Damien had met. How about Marcel's instead? I countered. I've been meaning to try their steaks. And let's bring the children. I miss them. Julian hesitated but agreed. I insisted on making the reservation myself. It would be my treat. I immediately called Gideon. Perfect, he said. I've already spoken with the manager at Marcel's. His name is Marcel. He's agreed to help us. We can use a private room with a presentation screen. Gideon had been discreetly honest, explaining we needed to present sensitive evidence in a private investigation. The next day, we met Marcel, a professional and discreet man who showed us a private room perfect for our needs. He demonstrated how to play a video on the large screen and assured us of complete privacy. He would have a staff member start the video on my signal, a press of the waiter call button, and ensure no one interrupted until it was over. For the next 2 days, Gideon and a video editor compiled the evidence into a concise, damning 5-minute film, photos of the motel, the restaurants, the park, all overlaid with the audio of Serafina and Damien plotting to destroy my family. On Friday, we watched the final cut. It was painful but irrefutable. Tomorrow, my family's life would change forever. Are you sure about this, Arthur? Gideon asked. I was. The alternative, letting Serafina's deception continue, was far worse. I'm sure, I said. It's the only way. On Saturday, I dressed in the suit Eleanor had loved, feeling her presence with me. I arrived early at the restaurant and met Gideon, who was coordinating things from a back room. At 7, my family arrived. Julian was tense, Serafina was radiant with her false smile, and the children were absorbed in their phones. We sat, me at the head of the table facing the screen. After the main course, Serafina began her pitch. Arthur, we're so glad you came. We've given it a lot of thought, and Sunset Hills is the perfect place for you. She laid out her plan to sell the house, her eyes gleaming at the mention of the money she was already spending in her mind. I let her talk, nodding as if I were considering it. When she finished, sensing victory, I looked her in the eye. I have made a decision, I said slowly. But before I announce it, I want to show you all something. I pressed the button. The lights dimmed, and the screen lit up. The first image was Serafina and Damien, hand in hand, entering the motel. Serafina froze, her face a mask of horror. What is this? She whispered. But the images kept coming, the dates and times stamped in the corner, building an undeniable timeline of her betrayal. Julian sat pale and motionless. The children finally looked up from their phones, their eyes wide with shock. Turn it off! Serafina shrieked, rushing for the door, but it was locked. Then the audio began, her own voice filling the room, plotting, scheming, dismissing her husband, her children, and me. We heard her talk about getting rid of the old man, selling my house, and abandoning her children because her new lover wasn't fond of them. When the video ended, the room was plunged into a dead silence, broken only by Clara's quiet sobs. I can explain, Serafina stammered. Explain what? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. How you cheated on me. How you plan to abandon our children. What, exactly, do you want to explain, Sarah? It's a fake, she cried, turning on me. Your father set this up. But her own voice from the recording had already condemned her. Mom. Clara's voice trembled. What are you saying? Leo stared at his mother, his face a mask of cold fury. "You lied to us," he said flatly. "What now?" Serafina finally asked, defeated. "Now," Julian rose, his face etched with pain, "you pack your things and go. To your Damien. To your new life. Without me. Without our children." He said he would file for divorce and seek full custody, and with the evidence we had all just seen, he would get it. He took the children by the hand and led them to the door. I stayed behind. "Why?" Serafina asked, looking small and broken. "Why did you destroy my family?" "I didn't destroy it, Serafina," I said calmly. "You did," she exploded in a tirade of hatred. "You've disgusted me since day one. A miserable, lonely old man, jealous of anyone else's happiness." I listened without emotion. Her words were hollow. When she was done, I stood, put on my coat, and walked to the door. "Goodbye, Serafina," I said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I left her sitting alone in the wreckage of the life she had thrown away. Gideon drove me to Julian's house. The lights were on. "Thanks for everything, Gideon," I said. "You were a true friend." I took a deep breath and rang the bell. Julian opened the door, looking exhausted but resolute. "Dad." "Come in the living room." I told him my decision. "I'm selling the house, Julian." "And I'm leaving this town." "Or why?" he asked, startled. "It's time for a change. Too many ghosts here. I think I'll go to the sea." "Eleanor always wanted to live by the sea." He looked at me for a long moment. "You did the right thing, Dad. It was painful, but it was necessary." We sat together, father and son, navigating a shared loss. He told me the children were shaken but asleep. We talked about the future, about how to help them heal, about how to tell them the truth without all the sordid details. As the night wore on, I knew they would be okay. They were strong. As for Serafina, she made her choice. Now she would have to live with it. I left Julian's house as the sky began to lighten, feeling a profound sense of peace. "You were right, Eleanor," I whispered to the stars. The truth always finds its way out. A new chapter was beginning, for all of us.